Also related to transportation costs, but maybe a little bit more related to urbanization economies. Our fourth is bulk gaining industries. And so the idea here is it's going to be the opposite of what we saw in the previous example of bulk reducing. These are different products or different things in which in the production process, in the process of making them, they get bigger or they weigh more. So in the example on the left, we think about those automobile assembly plants. So earlier we mentioned kind of how maquiladoras, those GM assembly plants, they're, for example, there in Mexico. Essentially what they're doing is they're trying to find cheap labor, but they're also examples of bulk gaining industries because they take all those individual parts and pieces, the tires, the chassis, the seats, the upholstery, the radio, all of that, and they put it together into one final product that's going to be bigger than all those individual parts, and that's the automobile. So that's also an example of a bulk gaining industry because as you take those individual pieces and parts, you make something bigger. And so that's why subsequently we find these automobile manufacturers trying to get those as close as they can to the U.S. border as possible. They're not sending those, into wherever they can find the cheapest labor in Mexico. They're looking for the cheapest labor in Mexico, but also the closest to the border because fabricating an automobile, is takes all those individual parts to make one bigger individual product. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got another example of a bulk gaining industry. This is, for example, bottling beer or anything, water bottles. So what happens is you have an empty water bottle, a plastic bottle that eventually gets filled, and then when it gets filled, that's overwhelmingly most of the weight of the water bottle. So essentially what they now do is you see these water bottle companies and beer bottle companies. You're seeing microbreweries pop up all over. Essentially what they're doing is they're taking advantage of the fact that transportation costs are being lessened because they're moving those to where the people are. For example, in Greenwood, they have a Nestle water bottle plant in which that's where the water bottles are actually filled with water is in Greenwood and then distributed throughout to Southside residents of Indianapolis. And so what you do is if you look at the Nestle water bottle, it'll say the source is the Greenwood water or public water supply. So it's essentially tap water. That's, of course, got some chemicals put in it. But the idea is they fill that. They don't fill it in Timbuktu in the middle of nowhere. They try to fill as close as they can to where the people are because that's the final product. And so beer bottling, beer bottles and distributors, they try to locate as close as they can to where there's large numbers of people. And so it's all about transportation costs. It's all about lessening and minimizing transportation costs. And so here we see the difference between bulk reducing and bulk gaining, which are essentially a final product is going to be bigger or way more than it does at the beginning of the production process.